So hello everyone and welcome to our Grieving seminar for the evening. I'd like to introduce Christine McMillan, who will be leading us tonight.
Thank you so much. Am I on? Yeah. Better? Better. Okay, there you go. Thank you, and to Families First, Alyssa is going to be videotaping tonight's seminar. My company, McMillan Counseling and Consulting, has been working with Families First for probably the last 10 years or so. And I've been affiliated somehow, being in the bereavement industry, with Families First for about 25 years. And I'm really pleased to be affiliated with the funeral home because they do care for their families, and they continue to offer support after the burial. So I am very grateful to be affiliated with them. So thank you for coming out tonight on this kind of dreary, damp, what feels like the first real fall day. I do appreciate it. We're going to be here about an hour and a half, depending on how talkative you are tonight. I will ask you if you want to take a break at some point, and if you do, that's fine. If you need to get up and stretch or use the restrooms at any point in time, please do so. I will not be insulted. The restrooms are through the back, the second set of doors, and both of them are out that way. Okay? So before we get started, maybe we can just do a check-in first by silencing our phones. Is anyone expecting any urgent calls at all? So if we could silence them or turn them off, I have done that as well. And we'll just kind of check in with ourselves. How are you feeling right now? Are you a little tense, nervous? Sad. Who said sad? Sad, yeah. Thank you. Just check in with yourself and don't judge yourself for whatever you're feeling at the moment, because there's certainly a lot of judgment out there in our society. So I just want you to accept whatever you're feeling, what you're feeling right now, and what may come up during the evening without any kind of judgment. And we don't accept any kind of apology for tears. You know how many times I hear I'm sorry when I'm counseling someone for bereavement? And tears are very healing. And so we're not going to apologize for our tears, and we're not going to judge ourselves for our tears at all. So you're here because of the death of your beloved parent or maybe parents. And we know that grief is universal. However, as much as it's universal, it's also very unique. It's unique as your fingerprint. It's as unique as your relationship with your parent or parents. So no two experiences will be alike. So obviously I don't know everyone in the audience, so I don't know your story. So this is a very general overview of the uniqueness of grieving a parent's death in adulthood. And while you're grieving the death, you're grieving not only the perfect parental relationship you might have had, you're also maybe grieving the not-so-perfect relationship that you might have had, and everything in between. But you're not only grieving their absence, you're grieving other losses that also come with the death of a parent. Come on in. Come on in. We've got seats up here. And yet it's such a misunderstood death. It's not an incidental event. It really isn't. It's quite significant. But society would have you believe that it's not really that significant when you're an adult. But it is a turning point in our lives. I'm part of that group as well. I lost my mom 18 years ago. She'd be over 80 now. She was 67 when she died. And as I get closer and closer to that age, it doesn't seem so old. Right? And yet, society would have us believe that it's really not that important. And so you're likely to not have as much understanding as well as support. But it is a significant event. It's because our parents have a role to be our first protectors, our advocates, and our friends. And they are the very first object of our attachment. An attachment is hardwired into mammals, into human beings. It's biologically instinctive for the child, for the infant, to what is called proximity-seeking behavior, to be close to an adult that is nurturing and attentive and meets their needs. That's what our parents were for us. And did you know that their response to us when we're infants and in childhood forms the blueprint or the template by which we engage with people the rest of our lives? That's how important the parental relationship is. We're hardwired. John Bowlby is considered the guru of attachment theory. And he said what infants do is they engage in what we call proximity-seeking behavior. They look for their caregivers. They don't think about it. They naturally seek out their caregivers. And when we lose somebody, don't we do that in a way? Our heads know, but our hearts don't know. We think that they're coming home, or we go to pick up the phone to call them. That's hardwired in us. And when we're separated from what we call objects of our attachment, we experience separation anxiety. What does a child do when mom or dad isn't around and they have to have their needs met? They protest. Grief is our way of protesting. Does that make sense? Right? We're protesting. So that's what grief is. It's a form of separation anxiety. I was supposed to be ready when my mother died in 2008 from metastatic breast cancer. I was supposed to be ready to say goodbye. After all, she was in her 70s and had been ill for quite some time. I was not a child or even a young adult. At my age, I was supposed to be ready, but I was not. So Nancy was not ready for what? This is what we're all here for, grief. A simple 5-letter word that has profound effects on our lives that we had no idea could affect us that way. So as I said, it's universal but highly unique. How you're going to respond to the death of your parent or anyone loved in your life will depend on the kind of relationship you had, whether the death was sudden or anticipated, so the circumstances surrounding the death, what kind of support system you have, how you look at life, what's your philosophy of life? That if I make plans, they have to come to fruition? Or do you understand that life throws you curveballs? What about your religious belief or your cultural influences? We also know that males and females process grief differently. So a grief outcome is going to be different depending on all those things, not only who died. And we know that grief can refer to any kind of loss. loss of health, loss of a job, loss of a relationship ending. But you are not only grieving, you are also what we call bereaved, which is to be separated as a result of death. So you are bereaved and you're grieving. So grief triggers, or grief affects us in 5 different domains. But I just want you to have a look at some of these responses. Could probably add more to it. That's what grief can do. Now, you don't have to experience all of those, but if you can check off a few of them, you're normal. Your grief experience is normal. However, you don't have to remain here. But if you experience this at the onset, and for a few months after, it's okay. It's very normal. Any questions about any of these?
I got them all,
You got them all. Wow.
except for one.
Oh, okay.
Seriously, I've gone through pretty well every one of those in the last 6 weeks.
But as I said, you don't have to experience.
I've gone through, I'm
Yeah,
getting through, so.
You're getting through it.
Slowly.
So what if I told you, I call this good grief? There's nothing abnormal about experiencing any of this. And yet we question it, don't we? Why am I tired? Why am I forgetful? Why don't I want to be around people? Why am I angry? Why am I jealous? Why aren't I motivated to do the things I normally enjoy? It's because their absence has got your attention. You have no interest in anything else at the beginning. And even if the death was anticipated, you're still likely to walk around thinking, I can't believe they're gone. I can't believe they're not here. That's what we refer to our head knowing, but our heart not knowing yet. So if we took those responses, we could kind of put them in these 5 domains. So I think emotional domain is pretty self-explanatory. When we're emotionally dysregulated or a little bit more emotional than our usual self, it takes our thinking offline. That's why you can't remember. That's why you have difficulty focusing. We don't have the bandwidth. I was going to say to remember a telephone number, but we don't have to remember telephone numbers nowadays. To remember where you live, to remember where you work, to remember somebody's birthday, not important. Because all our energy is focused on the fact that this person's no longer here. Grief is physical, so it's going to affect our bodies as well, not just our minds, but our bodies. Sleeping, eating disturbances, heart palpitations, shortness of breath. If you have any kind of chronic condition, have you noticed an increase in it? Have you noticed your arthritis getting worse, or your irritable bowel, your migraines? So it's very important, if you're new to the grief process, please get a complete physical so you have a nice baseline. Because when you do your grief work, and we'll get to that in a moment, we want to see some of these physical responses subsiding with time, with work and time. But if they don't, then at least we've got a baseline to go back to your doctor or your nurse practitioner to see if there's any organic reason. But we hold stress in our bodies. Do a scan of your body right now. What's tense right now? Shoulders, jaw, stomach. Relax, right? We hold tension in our bodies. It affects us socially too. We're not keen on being in large crowds. We're not keen on being with people who maybe still have their parents. And we're not tolerating our parents' absence very well. Or we could have the opposite effect. We may be very clingy. We may feel we don't have much in common with friends. People just don't get it. Or they diminish your grief. It was only your parent after all. They lived a long life. And so what you're more likely to do is also diminish your grief. You got to be careful of that, because what will happen if you allow yourself to believe that narrative is that you could experience what we call disenfranchised grief. And you'll carry your grief with you, and it'll keep popping up for the rest of your life until you deal with it. So don't let anyone tell you that your grief isn't important. And then lastly, it affects us on a spiritual level. And what we mean by that is the why. Why did it happen? Why to me? Why to them? How do I go on? It makes you question your belief system, not necessarily religious, but your belief system. So if we look at some of the known things about grief, is I want you to know that our protest is normal and natural. Please don't deny yourself that. You have to go through this process. And it is a process. It's not an event. There's no stages. It changes, it moves, it shifts, it's dynamic. One day you feel like you got it, and the next day it's got you. One day you think you've dealt with your anger or your regret and your guilt, and it pops up again next week. So it's constantly evolving and presenting itself to you as opportunities to work through it. And just like the waves, when you're at the beach in the middle of a storm, they come fast and furious at the beginning of the process. That's just the way it is. Your job is to kind of dig in and know that you can handle it. There's no end point. Does grief ever end? Well, only if you stop loving. But it's not going to feel as bad as it might be feeling right now. Because you're grieving because you love. So do you get over grief? No. We learn to live with the grief. We learn ways to live with it, and we'll always dance with our grief in one form or another. But it doesn't have to be leading us the rest of our lives. C.S. Lewis, after his wife died, said, "It can be our constant companion. But it doesn't have to be like that uninvited visitor." We get to know our grief. We befriend it. You can't do this alone. You do need other people. You need supports. So your job is to find the people who nourish you, who walk with you, who support you, who give you a little push when you need to, when you need it, but not push and pull you through the process. Not minimize your grief. And you have to embrace it. Surrender to the sorrow, as this gentleman said. He feels sad. Yeah. You know how many times I also hear, I used to be a happy person. Why am I so sad right now? Well, you've got a really good reason to be sad. You're sad because someone important in your life is no longer physically with you. But the sad doesn't have to continue to be big and to overtake you. And the why always precedes, how do I now get through it? How do I move through it? So you have to ask the whys before you get to the how. But that is something you have to decide, and you have to set the intention to say, how am I going to get through this? How do you get through it? Well, just like grief is normal and natural, we also have a great built-in mechanism that nature has provided us. And that's the process of mourning. That's the grief work. That's what you have to do so that grief softens and we can create a life around their absence. It is in the outward expression of how I'm feeling and thinking. And we do need it to reconcile, to live with it. So, you might be all grieving because it's happened to you. You might be sad, you might have regrets, you might have some relief if it was after a long illness. But are you mourning? Are you processing it? That's the painful thing that people don't want to do. And I will say, it is very difficult to mourn in our North American society. Because we've been given rules. Shh, don't talk about it. Because we don't want to make you sad. We don't want you to cry. So let's not bring up their names. So a lot of invitations to carry our grief instead of processing it. Things like, they lived a long, good life. They wouldn't want you to feel this way. You really got to get through it. You got to move on. After all, it was only your mother or father. They lived a long life. And so we become very uncomfortable and embarrassed about our grief feelings. And we've learned that we need to be happy at all times. And well, grief is inconvenient. Because we can't be happy when we're sad. And so we put on our mask. And we go through life. And I ask you how you're doing, and you say, what do you say? I'm fine. I'm fine. How can you be fine? Maybe at that moment you are. But I would suggest that we say it because it's just automatic. Because we think that's what the person wants to hear. But grieving without mourning is very dangerous. It leads you down a path to potentially developing what we call prolonged grief disorder. So, what are some examples of good mourning? Crying, talking, writing, painting it out, poetry writing, building something in their memory, using music, anything that gives outward expression to how I'm feeling in here. And it is it can be very culturally based as well. We don't do a good job here in this society. But there are lots of cultures around the globe that do it really well. They do it in a very healthy way. Doesn't mean they're not sad, but they face their sad. They deal with their sad. However, we're really good at medicating our feelings, right? Stuffing our feelings. Not feeling our feelings, because frankly, it's just much better that way. So here are some mourning avoiding behaviors. Anything to keep busy, anything not to feel the pain that or the sad that comes attached with the loss of a loved one. Avoiding triggers. Triggers help us get to that place where we can live with the grief. They feel like landmines, but they help us get to the place where we're living with integrated grief. So, if you're early in the process, you're most likely dealing with acute grief. You're in the middle of the storm. The waves are coming at you. You can't take a breath. You get pulled down. This is where you have to withstand it and not engage in any mourning avoiding behaviors. Because when you do that, the storm does calm down, and our grief then becomes integrated into our lives. It's not something that we're trying to outrun. Because we can't outrun it. So if you come and see me early in the grief process, I'm most likely engaging in a lot of psychoeducation that I'm providing you right now. And I'm doing supportive counseling. If you, however, minimize your grief, and it goes underground, and you carry it instead of processing it, and you come to me years later, then I'm doing grief therapy. And then you know what? We've got grief here, but then we've got all these other things that you've been engaging in that we have to get to first. Maybe relationship issues, maybe issues on the job, maybe financial stressors, maybe addiction issues, before we even get to the grief. Because other issues have been created because we've avoided it. So we want to get to the point of integrating our grief. That's the grief that we can live with. So I just want you to think for a moment. I want you to maybe conjure up a sweet memory of your parent or parents. The very thing that may make you sad or bring a tear to your eye is the thing that brought joy to your heart. You're here because of that. Any questions? Any comments? Anything you want me to review? Anything you disagree with? So you're here because you were loved, and you love. And yet, as I said, it's such a misunderstood, even though it's the most common form of bereavement. And because we think very linearly, A, B, C, 1, 2, 3, our parents predecease us. And it's going to affect all of us, with the only caveat being that you must outlive your parent. And this kind of death doesn't normally, in adulthood, deprive us of a primary relationship. Because as we become young adults and adults, we usually have other primary relationships. Intimate partners, friends, co-workers. So the idea being, well then, it's really not, that relationship's not as important as maybe a spouse or a child. And so what you might find is society isn't there to support you, to understand. And don't fall into the trap of thinking because you know somebody who's lost a parent, they would have a better understanding. It really depends if they've done the processing of their grief. And the last point about self-imposed expectations, only you can change that. You must allow yourself to acknowledge the importance of this grief. Don't listen to the static in the background. Yes, they may have been 90. My father's going to be turning 91 next month. And he lives alone in Toronto. He will not move to Windsor. He's quite happy there. And I'm going to be very sad when he dies, presuming he dies before me. Listen, I will go through this process, but I'm not likely to question it. But I will miss him like crazy. I was a bereavement counselor at Canadian Mental Health when my mother died. Even though it was technically not a sudden death, it was a quick death. It was within 11 days she died of a cancer diagnosis. And my experience was more physical. A chronic condition that I have, it became worse. And I remember my daughter was about 7 then, and she would pat me on the back when I was crying, and she'd say, "It's okay, you've got me and Dad. You've got me and Dad." And yeah, I did, but I didn't have a mom. And so I understood that from my daughter, that comment. But I wouldn't understand it. I wouldn't be very accepting of it from an adult. It's like, well, you still got your mom. Yeah, I don't have my mom. They're not interchangeable. People are not interchangeable. But again, we want to make you feel better. So what are some themes? So even if they were ill, we're never ready for the impact. And we talked about how it impacts us on those 5 domains. And I think if we were to be honest, you know, we see our parents as immortal and infallible. And then we come to realize that they're mortal and can be very vulnerable. And then that brings up our mortality, doesn't it? Well, if it can happen to them, And it might not be a conscious, might be under the surface. And so it could bring up a lot of feelings of confusion, sense of abandonment, being left behind. And no matter who this person was, whether by birth or adoption or choice, they're irreplaceable. You can't go up and get another mom or a dad. And there's also effects on the family system. If you were not an only child, the dynamics can also be affected after the loss of a parent. And then, as I said, there's other kinds of losses. We call these symbolic losses, where the physical death is considered an actual loss, the real loss, but there's symbolic losses. Maybe there's a loss of the family home, a link to the past. If your relationship was less than ideal, you may have also lost that opportunity to make it better. And so you might have some regrets as well. So it's not just the physical being, them not being there. It's all these other things as well. Any comments, questions? And no matter how old we are, no matter how accomplished we may be, it's always nice to be able to share those with our parents, isn't it? Maybe go to them and bounce our ideas off of them. Not necessarily asking permission. They're the link to our past. I'm desperately videotaping my dad now, right? I've asked him to write his story, but he hasn't done that yet. I don't think he's going to. So whenever I'm in his company, I videotape conversations with him as a keepsake. Because we're no longer able to go back there and learn from them. Generational tug of war, that refers to, you might now realize that if you've been living some part of your life based on your parents' values, you may find that you're not obligated to do so anymore. And that might be a little uncomfortable or conflictual, or it could be very releasing as well. You know what, I don't necessarily have to do this because Dad liked it to be done this way. It can be liberating. If you see yourself as a mature adult, that you can forge your own self forward. You can write your own script. It doesn't have to be based on what they expected. Regrets. We all have regrets. Maybe for not having that perfect relationship, maybe for not being the perfect child. Things said, unsaid. We have to come to terms with that as well. And then also, if you were caregiving your parent, you know, it might hit you that here we've got a role reversal. They were our first caregivers, and now we're put in that position. We are still someone's children until our parents die, so their deaths mark our final passage into adulthood. Are you ready to be an adult?
Just
Steve.
on the last slide, there was one, we were talking about the generational, the
Yep.
tug of war, where in some ways, and for certain things, it might be that release, that liberation, that freedom, for not, you're always obliged, it seems, to do something, and now there's no, that obligation, like you're removed, that guilt, that you were doing something because it was expected of you, and you just never wanted to say no. But as well, I find with what I'm living through, there's some things that might be rather meaningless, but I continue them just because of the tradition. And I just came back from a funeral from my godmother, and we all started commenting on that. It's almost meaningless to us, certain things that we were doing, like, Christmas traditions or certain foods or certain whatever way. But we have chosen to continue them because that brings meaning. Just the fact that we continue to do it brings meaning.
I think what's important in what you just said, Steve, is your choice. That you're making the choice of your own free will. That you continue to have roast every Sunday. All right? So that's important, that as you go forward, you can choose to continue serving. And that links us to them. And that's important. But there's a difference between making a choice and continuing to feel obligated that they would expect this of you. So that's something where we have to then, what are our values? Are your parents' values consistent with my values? Are they applicable to the 21st century as well? I'm not saying you throw all traditions and customs out the door either. It's got to make sense to you. Are you living your authentic life? But I think choice is important, that you're making the choice. Anybody here an adult orphan?
Both parents gone, that would be me.
Both parents. Did you know that's who you are? Or at least that's the title that society gives you? Yeah, my husband's an adult orphan. He became an adult orphan within a week. Within a week.
My parents died within 3 months
Within 3 months?
last year.
Unfortunately, that qualifies you too. It's been described as a horrible emptiness, right? So imagine yourself standing on the beach, and the storm comes in, and it's just dissipating, and the next one comes and pulls you under. Literally, where do you go? Can't go home. Literally and figuratively. Where's your home? And it can trigger, you were probably still, who died first? Your mom and dad? Your dad, okay. So 3 months is not a long time even to come up from there after your first parent died. But I'm sure it brought back all of those feelings again. You know, if you think back to the first couple of slides, you were probably there. And then pull back again. And it might be confusing, especially if they died close together and it's relatively early, that your grief is going to oscillate between mom and dad. You can't choose who to grieve at a specific time. Whatever comes to the surface, comes to the surface. You could be jealous or resentful of people who still have their parents. And of course, you're faced with your own mortality. When one parent dies, but when both parents die, you suddenly move up one more rung on the ladder. Yes, sir.
I'm an adult orphan plus a widower. My
Wow.
dad died first, my wife died, and my mom passed away a year later. Talk about triple whammy.
That is. In what space of time, sir?
Well, the father passed away 18 years ago, the wife passed away 5 years ago, and the mom passed away a year ago in August.
So certainly the last two deaths for sure.
Yeah.
A short period of time. And your wife and your mom, two significant female people,
Oh, yeah.
figures in your life.
Yeah. I find it very hard. I find it, how do I say that? Grief, but I'm also jealous because they're gone, and I want to be with them. You know, that sounds weird. And
No, I see people, heads nodding. Yeah.
Not me at all.
Understand that feelings. So grief is the journey between the head and the heart. The head knows, the heart doesn't. And the grief journey is about getting the heart to very slowly expose themselves and feel those triggers so that it moves up to the reality that the head knows. So that's why we say don't make any major decisions based on your feelings early in the grief process, because our feelings do have the potential to change. Doesn't mean we don't miss them, but it's not sharp, right? It's not searing. So when you say something like, doesn't make sense what I'm feeling, that's because you're thinking that.
yeah,
Well, we have to honor our feelings. But we also can't stay in those feelings. We have to be able to take it back and forth. And we can't think ourselves through grief either, because it is emotional attachment. So we have to move back and forth between the heart and the head and the heart. I'll tell you a quick story. I was supporting a gentleman who had lost his wife, and he was, of course, devastated. His young adult son was about to be married out west. And he told me in one of my sessions that he didn't want to go to he didn't think he could manage going to the wedding. And I said, why is that? And he said, because I have to go without my wife, and I don't think I can manage it. It would be just too painful. So I acknowledge that would be difficult. Again, a trigger to feel the pain. So here's an opportunity to process it. I said, understand though that you're not going to always feel this way. But hopefully your son will only have one wedding. And you don't want that to be a regret. So our feelings change as we process it. And if we make decisions based on how bad we're feeling at the moment, especially in situations that could have longer standing implications, we will come to regret it. So feel your feelings, but they don't have to make sense. Because they don't. It doesn't make sense. Grief doesn't make sense. Yes, right out through the back door. Thank you for sharing. Yes.
Even though my dad is still physically around, I feel like I fall into this category because of his Alzheimer's having been really advanced since my mom was passed last year. And it was really hard. I went to visit him back home in Lebanon since his Alzheimer's has gotten worse. And like facing that grief all over again was just so, there's just not even words for it, it just sucked all the time. And parts of me are glad that he still remembers my mom, even though he doesn't remember that she's died. That's brought me a little bit of peace, but it just, I don't know, feeling like I have to go through this alone again. Is,
So it's like you can see your dad slipping through your fingers.
yeah, he's here, but he's not here. You know. I also got engaged on that trip, and like having the best day of my life, and immediately being overwhelmed with that grief of I'm so happy and I hate this at the same time because my parents aren't here. Just, every milestone feels like another wave of grief.
Yeah, yes. So what you're saying is absolutely true. It's a bittersweet event. It's a bittersweet moment. And as we work to integrate, but you're also telling me you're still living your life. You still understand that life needs to move forward. The world is still spinning. This person in your life wants to be with you. And so you've made the decision not to put life on hold because of your sad. And it sounds like you're willing to work with both. And we can do that. It is possible. It's not easy, but it is possible. That you can honor your sad for both mom and dad's illness, but also be grateful that you've still got connections in your life. That is tough. Thank you for sharing. Thank you. Yes?
So I want to share a personal experience because listening to all this, I think I have a bigger issue with anger over grief. So my sister and I have been placed in a very, what I will call, unique situation. But at this time last year, knowing that both our parents were not doing well, my mother went into hospice. And we watched her slowly fade away for 6 weeks. That was one of the toughest things to ever deal with. But in that whole situation, knowing that my dad wasn't doing well, my mother, for whatever reason, decided to put everything in the hands of the bank. And with that taking place, basically when we watched my mother deteriorate to the point of she passed November 1st last year, we were only left with my dad, and he was not well. And based on the situation at hand, the lawyers took control of everything and made us share with my dad that my mother had passed, which we did not want to do. He immediately basically starved himself to death and died probably of a broken heart Christmas Eve. I was then locked out of the house that I'd been staying in that we grew up in for 50 years until we no longer had any rights to anything. And here we are 9 months later, we've had zero control over any situation with our parents, zero. No control with the funeral home, no control with the banks, no control with lawyers, no control with the house, no control with anything. So to be put in that position, here I am 9 months later, my anger has overtaken any grief I could possibly have.
You deserve it.
And it's ongoing. It's still ongoing to this day, and only getting worse, to the point where we're probably being taken advantage of by the bank. But the house is still there 9 months later, filled with our parents' belonging and all of our sentimental memories and belongings that we are not allowed to touch. And it's an unbelievable situation.
Yeah, it sucks.
So I can't, for the last year, I've had a hard time grieving because my anger just overtakes the whole situation.
What's your name?
Scott.
Scott. Actually, Scott, your anger is part of your grief. And I think what you're talking about is more your sad and the missing. And when it's as complicated as your situation is, where there is really nothing within your control, it adds all those other layers to your grief. And these are all what we call time-sensitive issues that need to be dealt with. Excuse me. Gone. Back is coming. Oh, am I back?
You're back.
So, where was I? They're very time-sensitive issues, and so you have to deal with that. And the anger is part of your grief. And I think what you're saying is, I want to get to the part of missing them.
Sure.
I want to get to the part of remembering them. Sounds extremely complicated. And somebody's death, the death of somebody that we love, takes all control out of our hands. That's why we don't like it. And then on top of that, you've got a third party intervening in very personal and private decisions.
Yeah, that's the toughest part. We have no control over decisions that we wanted to make. That we spent our life thinking we get to make these decisions, and then you don't.
So it was, you would like to go back and find out why. Why were those
100%.
choices made?
For all the conversations I had with my mother, and she was very stubborn, but we feel she was conned into let us take care of everything. And for anybody in this room, don't ever let that decision be made. Don't ever. Because it will be the worst experience of your life, for sure.
Did she have a friend at the bank? Is that what happened?
Just
Yeah, she had a friend at the bank.
long-time customer,
Yeah, that's what I mean, and that person figured they were doing the right, but they weren't.
looking after themselves.
Yeah, that's what they needed a
Now it's
promotion.
coming back. So
Promotion
we'll
or something.
kind of come back to, yeah, so I hear what you're saying, Scott, and, you know, you gotta figure out the things that you can't control. I mean, that sounds like a very simplified, you know, answer, but I'm hearing what you're saying, and if it's down on paper and it's been signed, there's not much we can, thank you, there's not much we can do about, you know, about that. But know that you are grieving, but it's not the sad part. My parents left me while I was in process. I had just begun to evolve from single adult to married woman with children. My parents left me responsible for passing on family stories and traditions. They left me without a direct link to my childhood. They left me with many questions unanswered. They left me before I was old enough to be left. You can just feel that, can't you? She really feels abandoned, doesn't she? I'd be curious to see what her self-esteem is like, where she is in life, how she looks at life. But that really struck me as my parents left me. Actually, they died. But it feels like they left me. And so that's also part of your grief, processing that part. Now, if she was to stay in this place for a long period of time without processing it, any one number of these things could happen. And I'm not talking about feeling these things at the beginning of the process. I'm talking about these things later on, or being persistent and frequent. Because we do, as I said, have this natural process to get through this, and that's called mourning. We are resilient. Doesn't mean we're not sad. Doesn't mean it's without pain, but we are resilient. We can get through it. But we can also derail this naturalness if any one of these danger signs was to stay with us and be with our experience for a long period of time. I wish my mother could read my books, which I couldn't have written when she lived. At least they reveal too much of our generational differences. Right, Steve? And yet I also became more like my mother after her death, more domestic and nurturing. And when my father died, I became more like him, more of a naturalist and an outdoors woman. And when my brother died, I became more like him, more of a scientist, more of a presence to his children. The qualities I had relied on in them, I tried to make my own. And I was enlarged in the process. Am I grateful for that growth? Yes. Do I wish them back in life? Every day. So that is a really good summary of how we can get through this process when we do the work, still miss them, and would trade in the growth and the knowledge in a heartbeat, but we don't have that control. So at one point in time, many, many, many decades ago, it was thought that we had to withdraw all our connection with our deceased loved one. But now there's a new way of doing grief, and that is through the work of mourning. What naturally can happen is a continuing bond develops. And that's where we are able to create a new life without our loved one, but somehow keep them present in our life. And we call that a continuing bond. So it's an inner relationship. So death doesn't end a relationship, it changes it. So that's what we have to work towards in our grief work. Changing the kind of relationship we have with our loved one. And if you're, again, new in the process, I'm not expecting you to be here. But these Grieving Heart seminars are also about hope. Giving you hope that you can get through it. And so this is a natural outcome of our grief work. We find ways to integrate them into our life, but not be focused on the pain associated with their death. So a healthy integration is very adaptive. So keep talking about them. So how do we find meaning? You've got to do your work, and by doing your work, you've got to think about them. You've got to reflect. You've got to look back before you move forward. Life is understood backward, but lived forward. And many of us don't want to do the work of looking back. But who are these people in your life? How do they contribute to who you are? I'm not talking about just genetically. How do they influence you? Learn to embrace your memories. They may be painful now, but the memories don't change. Your reaction to your memories change. Your reaction to the pictures and the photographs change. Talk about them. Don't worry about anybody else becoming uncomfortable. Yes?
So, my mom was such a big part of my life. Also, she lived right across the hall from me, and now I've moved into her apartment. But my mom was such a huge piece of my life, and I talked about her on Facebook all the time in her life. And now all these memories come up, you know, like a year ago this happened. And so, you know, you're talking about the continuing bond, and like I do that all the time. Like every time there's something about my mom, I post it and I re-tag her, and it makes me feel good. It makes me feel like she's still around, and I can still like praise her is not the right word, but like I can still like enjoy her presence kind of thing, you know. And like one of my mom's friends sent me a message, and she said that she's worried about me, that I'm not moving on, that all I do is post about my mom, you know. And like that conversation really frustrated me because like I posted about my mom in my life while she was living. And
So why wouldn't you do it in death?
Right.
Yeah. My question to you would be, and you don't have to answer it, but if you were my client, I'd say, are you still going on with other parts of your life? Or are you totally focused on that? That's what I want to see. I want to see a person pay attention to their grief and mourn, and I also want to see them get on with life at the same time. It's when you're focused totally and obsessed with the death and not living any kind of life, even if it's getting up in the morning and putting one foot in front of the other, then I would be concerned. So what you might be referring to with this person is somebody who wants to hurry you along,
Yeah.
who doesn't want to see your morning.
And my mom only died 9 months ago.
Yeah.
Like, I don't feel like I need to move on.
Tell that person to come to my next presentation. As long as you're holding life
Yeah.
and paying attention to your grief at the same time, that's fine. So we're not going to listen to somebody else's static.
Yeah.
Okay? Yes?
Okay, I was just thinking, if you give your life purpose, take the best of your mother, the best of your father, and bring that forward in life.
That's exactly right.
You're living, with them and going forward.
So at the beginning of a grief process, remember our hearts and our brains are just focused on their absence. As we do our work, as we do our mourning, we open ourselves up to continuing to live, and their memories take on a proportionate part of our lives. So at the beginning, we were obsessed and focused. Now their memory is part of how we go forward. So whatever parts you choose to take of them, whether it be a tradition or a way of being or whatever, and that's a very personal decision. Thank you. Anything else? Anybody else?
Yeah, just, my mother died 6.5 weeks ago. And, my brother, he's a whatever. He came down for the funeral, nice guy, and then the minute he gets home back to Edmonton, he's not every day. When's her will coming out? I need the money, I need the money, I need the money. Because he knows she left him something. And I'm dealing with this like every other day, an email or a phone call and that, and he, for 15 years, was never around, but he showed up about 4 years ago back in her life, knowing she's getting near the end, and it's just killing me that he's just doing this for her memory, you know what I mean? It's just all money,
We all.
I'm trying to grieve, and I gotta deal with this, because I've been around with her since I was 30 years old. In the last few years, she's been getting weaker, and I'm a healthcare aide, so I've been taking care of her. And then all of a sudden, one Sunday, she looked like she had a stroke, and she was dead at 11:30 in the morning, and by midnight, she was gone. But I was with her the whole time,
So
but I'm the only one around.
we all grieve differently.
No,
and
he's just an ass.
Okay.
He's an ass, it's just all there.
So we grieve differently, and that's also,
I have the same brother.
He's an
that's also,
ass, that's just it.
I have the same brother.
that's also part of the process, yeah.
Well, this is the guy that, when our house flooded, he came to fix it, and he charged her $10,000 to fix it, and that's his mother. So,
If you want to chat with me after, I'd be more than happy to.
that's the
Yeah.
kind of guy he is, so.
Yeah. I think we've all got people.
We all got
like that
someone in
our
the
lives.
family,
That's right.
it's just getting in my way of my grief
Yeah.
and that sort of.
Mariana?
I just want to add to the girl over there about like the Facebook and the
Yep.
how proud of your parents with you. My dad passed away 5 years ago now, and every year on the day he passed away, I'll put something up about him, and it's nice to I tag my sister, my mom, our family, all his friends, just comment everything they remembered about him. So it's a nice way to.
Yeah.
And if I can add, she's the most fabulous writer on the face of this earth.
And my mom
And
has to say.
I have to, but it's and she still makes me cry, like still.
No one makes you cry, Georgia. You cry. She writes things that make you cry.
I cry a lot.
And you have an investment in the story, which is a great segue. I would like to introduce you to Mariana. She will come and expand on her story of losing her father. I've had the privilege of supporting Mariana through her grief. And I'm very grateful that she's agreed to come and share her story. Because lived experience obviously just elevates grief information just a little higher in terms of, here's somebody who's gone through what you all are experiencing in varying degrees. And so I did not take it lightly when I asked Mariana to come and speak, so I wonder if you could come up here now, please.
Hi. So my story is about June 21st, 2018. So first, let's start off with a little about me. Hi, my name is Mariana. I am 25 years old, and I never thought grief would slap me in the face as early as it did. Sorry, I'm nervous. Okay. I was born and raised in Kingsville. I have my parents to thank for where I am today. Without them, I would not be able to stand up here today and tell you all about my wild ride that happened only in 5 short years. Now, let's get to the reason we're all here. Grief is an interesting thing. It wants you to feel, but at the same time, your brain is protecting you from any emotions with dealing with the loss or trauma of what happened. If someone would have told me that at the age of 20, I would have been walking into my grief period, I would have laughed and said they don't know what they're talking about. But oh, how the universe had a different plan for me in my 20s era. Let's start with a little back history. My dad. His name is Wayne. He was the smartest, most caring, slightly cranky if he didn't get his nap in Tim Hortons coffee, but all around best man I will ever know and love. He would always stop to help others and an all around fun guy you could easily be yourself with. He taught me what it was like to have a strong head on my shoulders and that there's nothing I can't set my mind to and accomplish. And because of him and the graces of my parents' checkbooks, I was able to graduate college. There's always a part of me that thinks, the part of my brain that told me to stay in school. I always believed that the universe works in odd ways, and this was one of them. Because a week after I graduated, my dad passed away. And a big dream of his was to watch at least one of his kids accomplish walking across the stage. And that's a smile on his face I will never forget. My dad was the best teacher. Did he get distracted? Oh, absolutely. But it made for a lot of fun memories. But now memories are all we're left with in our lives. I never imagined that one day police would walk up to my door and say they found him with no pulse. The police said I needed to go with them, but in my mind he was fine, and maybe they just had some misinformation. The police brought me to where my dad had been working. I remember everyone looking at me and just repeating, "We are so sorry." And in my head, all I could think of was, sorry for what? Because at this point, no one had really told me what was going on. But I look back now, and I can see my brain was in denial from what I had just heard. I went through that whole morning alone. My mom was at work. I had my brother with me, but his brain functions different than the average person, and I could tell it didn't register with him what kind of day this was going to be. I remember having to call everyone. There was this feeling in my gut that told me to call whoever would pick up. I remember calling my aunt, and she said she had seen him driving an hour or so go through town. It's interesting how fast grief can pop up in your life. With the help of Kingsville OPP, and with the first and hopefully last ever police car ride, I managed to make it to the hospital and was met by a social worker. She put me in a room and started asking me medical questions about my dad. This gave me hope that he was alive and they just needed some medical information. I gave her what information I knew and simply asked if he was alive. That's all I wanted to know. She replied that we should wait for my mom. After what felt like forever, my mom got there, and all you could see is the panic on her face as if it darkened the room with sadness as she walked in. And now my gut feeling told me to hang on, because this was going to be a bumpy ride. Not long after, the doctor came in and explained to us they did everything they could, but he didn't make it. And when I tell you everything just went into slow motion like it does in the movies, I'm not kidding. I remember screaming as someone lowered me to the couch. It didn't feel real. This man overcame anything life threw at him. One thing he's fine, and the next time regretting never saying goodbye or have a good day or even one last I love you. I didn't know what real heartbreak felt like, and I never imagined this would be how I experienced it. In my 20s, I would never imagine that I would even have to understand what grief is. Sure, I lost people in my life, family, friends, even pets, but none of them hurt the way this hurt. Losing a parent is a different kind of emotion I didn't even know I could feel, and something no one ever can prepare you for in life. It's an emptiness in your life, it's an emptiness in yourself that you can't pin where it's coming from, but you can feel that it's there. It's the what ifs. What if I had done this? Would it have changed it? Would they still be here? And all the missing outs. No early adult person or 20-year-old wants to be on a grief journey. I know I sure didn't. I wanted to start my life, hang out with my friends, just be 20 and go with the flow and be carefree. But instead, I threw myself into 3 jobs and buried my feelings down below with being busy. You may ask, did it help? Surprisingly not. It managed to make it hurt less for a little bit, but deep down, even though I was smiling on the outside, I was crying on the inside. I remember my best friend looking at me one day and just said, "You're different." I was like, well, yeah, trauma doesn't just walk up to you one day, blindside you, rip your heart out, put it back, and then say, okay, go back to being normal. I didn't say that to her, but I just said, I know, because I didn't know what to say. Even months later, I didn't have words for how I was feeling. But no one could even begin to understand what that feeling was, as I myself didn't even understand it. There's days I could come out of the dark clouds and smile for real, but even a song lyric or an orange truck like my dad drove would send me back into those dark storm clouds. Grief really says, look at the smallest thing and cry. But what I had to learn is grief doesn't want to break you. It's not there to make those memories horrible. It's an outlet to let the built up emotions out, to remember how amazing the person you lost once was, and a way to heal weirdly enough. Grieving can only last so long. In some way or some form, it will force its way in. That brings me to May 2020. There was a time, I could tell you, I felt as crazy as people stocking up on toilet paper. It's no secret. The pandemic stopped the whole world. People were laid off or out of work, and I was kind of one of those people. I still had a job, but my work location had to close due to COVID safety rules. I was waiting to be put somewhere else. In that time frame, I had no job to distract me. I couldn't see my friends or family. I was home all day, every day, and for so many hours, my mind had so much time to catch up on all those things I had put off. And boy, I had no idea what I was in for. I tried so hard to fight off the thoughts that were in my brain, the self-harm thoughts. In my mind, I'm like, I've been here before, and they've always seemed to go away, but this time they stayed. And for once in my life, it scared me. I was never a person to ask for help. If I was struggling, you wouldn't see it. But at this point, I knew I needed one person, and that person was my mom. I went to her crying, saying I felt off, but I didn't go into detail about what I had been thinking. I just told her I needed her, and that was step 1. For weeks after that, I was so afraid to be alone that I slept on a mattress on the living room floor while my mom slept on the couch. I lost all sense of who I was. I had never seen this person before. My mom taking care of me all over again as if I was not a full-grown adult. I would lay on the mattress all day, either sleeping or playing on my phone. I wouldn't leave my house. I barely ate. I was so upset with how weak I had become that this wasn't me and I could always pull through. Sadly, the thoughts got worse, and I knew I needed more help than just a mattress on the living room floor. On May 8th, 2020, in the evening, I remember sitting on my couch with my mom on the right side of me as tears were streaming down my face. No facial expression, no words, just me on a couch, crying while staring at the wall. My mom sat beside me and asked, what do I need? Again, I had no words. In my brain, I was yelling, help me, but my ego told me not to say it out loud so people don't think I was crazy or weak. In my grief journey, there was one thing I was always grateful for, but there was this part of my brain that still held on to reality and made a rational decision and decided in that moment it was going to be louder than the part of my brain that was pulling me down. I told my mom I needed help, professional help. She didn't even hesitate. She packed me up, grabbed whatever we needed, and off we went. The whole drive, I just There, I just stared into the windshield, not one single word was said between us. And of course, it's COVID, and now my mom has to send a scared, mentally exhausted 22-year-old into the hospital. Fast forward through all the hospital stuff, I managed to get in touch with a crisis person from Windsor via video call. She connected me with doctors that were hopefully going to help me, and in that moment, my brain felt like it had a weight lifted off of it. I knew this was just a stepping stone. There was a lot of work ahead of me. The next day, laying there on my mattress, my mom on the couch, she says, "I want to tell you something." She had let me know about the lady who specialized in grief. She had heard wonderful recommendations and asked if I would give it a try. I looked at my mom and just nodded yes, because at this point, anything was better than what I was going through. Thankfully, that wonderful lady was Christine McMillan. She has helped me through what I thought was something I would never find my way out of. And to this day, continues to help me through life's newest adventures. Grief is not at all what I had planned for my 20s or the rest of my life, really, but it has made me realize some things. I am stronger than the trauma that happened. I am not weak or crazy for getting help. That was probably the strongest thing I've ever done. Grief doesn't control me. Do I let it happen? Yes. But I don't sit in it for long, and even now, when I have a memory, I can smile and remember I was lucky enough to have those moments with my dad. Some people don't even get that. And I will forever be grateful for the time I did get with him, even if it was short-lived. Grief isn't a winning or losing game. You can't challenge it, and you can't change it. Many won't accept it, but coming to understand it has made me who I am today. I needed to start with the grief first before I could find out who I really was. The memories from that day will always stick with me. I will never forget the gut feeling, the gut-wrenching day, but I can also say I persevered and came out on the other side of grief's wild games. It is not impossible, but please don't think you have to do it alone. I wrote this from a 20-year-old's perspective, but grief doesn't care about age. It's a journey and an uncomfortable one that will test you to your limits, that gives you that anxious feeling of fight or flight, that I don't want to do this response in your brain. But I'm here today to show you those feelings are all valid and normal. I too at one point felt hopeless and like giving up, and I can tell you I'm glad I didn't. All the uncertainty I was so scared of as part of what made me the strong person I am today, whether my grief started age 20 or 55. One thing I want you to take away from today is no matter your age, everyone's grief journey is going to be different. And yes, it can be even tough, and it can be intimidating and scary. But with a great support system, goes a long way, even if that person is someone you just met, or even if it's somebody you meet so often by appointment. You are stronger than your grief, your fears, and your what-ifs. This was just a little insight into mine, was while I was trying to navigate my 20s. And I'll be the first to admit my journey isn't done. I have many ways to go. Grief just opened up a whole new adventure for me to be who I am. And I will be forever thankful for the journey I've been on, even if that sounds insane. But beautifully insane is how I would explain my life. Thank you.
Not how you want to spend your 20s, the first part of your 20s, is it?
My dad died when I was 20. That's when my dad died. Same thing.
So, life intervenes, and Mariana had to learn some really tough lessons when she should have been out being a 20-year-old. And she was very honest. It was raw. It was really raw, and I thank you for that. Because it's not pretty. It's not pretty. It hurts. And she tried to avoid it. She admits it. Until she could not avoid it any longer. And the best thing that you could give Wayne is who you are today. The person you are today, and how you've grown.
Yeah, you were pulled into it kicking and screaming. But now you're thriving. And so I'm sure you trade in all those lessons to have them back, but we don't have that choice. So the only choice we have is, how do I move forward? So I thank you for doing this in memory of your dad. And I'm sure the local Tim Hortons misses him.
They do. They were the first one to send us a basket. They really were.
And my brother-in-law kept apologizing to them.
Their best customer.
I will tell you though, in honor of my husband, who we were at the home hardware store, and the young lady there, he knew everybody. He knew everybody. And she said to me, she said that when they heard that my husband died, the town stood still. And I went, wow. Wow. What do you say?
Big footprint, right? Big footprint. Yeah. So, this is what I'd like you to take away other than Mariana's story. Please give yourself permission to mourn freely. Practice self-care in those 5 domains: physical, spiritual, social, cognitive, and emotional. Please don't listen to anyone else's script. Resist the temptation to minimize your grief. Find people who walk with you in this journey, whether it be family, friends, people in a support group, strangers, professional help. Find people that's going to be on your team. There are no timelines and there's no stages to grief, as long as you keep putting one foot in front of the other. Grief bursts are what happens when you think you got it all settled and done, and all of a sudden grief taps you on the shoulder and says, remember me? That's okay. That doesn't mean you haven't done your grief work. It's just grief reminding yourself. And if you need to, seek professional help. So in closing, I'd like you to take with you that our parents live on in the way we honor their impact on our lives, traditions, and family rituals. So we don't get over it, we move through it. Thank you so much for coming out tonight, for participating. It made it a much richer experience tonight. Any questions or comments? Thank you so much, and I wish you all the best in your own grief journeys.
Thank you.
Did you have a question here?
I was just wondering, how do you know personally that you've dealt with it enough so that in the future you don't have recurring issues? Because you mentioned that if you don't deal with it adequately, that it can basically come back to bite you later on. And how do you
For sure.
How you know?
How do you know? That you're not avoiding triggers, you're not avoiding anything that will remind you. Excuse me, I'm just gonna continue. You're not avoiding triggers, you're not diminishing it in any way. Your grief will come up, because as that young lady said, everything that you experience that brings joy will be a little bittersweet. So you will dance with your grief the rest of your life. But I guess the best way would be if I asked you to tell me your story and my assessment was, oh, this must have just happened because of the emotions connected to it, and I find out it was years later, then you haven't done your work. If it's bubbling, you know, we all know. We know if we haven't paid a bill, right? We know that. I'm talking literally. When we don't pay a bill, we know that we haven't paid the bill. And we know that next month the bill will be higher and higher and higher. So we have to be honest with ourselves also. If you can tell me the story, and you can also smile, and you can laugh, and maybe shed a tear, then you've probably done your work. And it never truly ends. We just learn to grow around it. And that's a good question. Because it isn't logical. It isn't definitive. As a therapist, as a counselor, I want to make sure that you're still moving forward. You're still enjoying things. You're still living your life. Any other questions? Yes.
I found my mom dead a few weeks ago, and I feel like I'm still in shock, right? And I'm like, I've had really bad moments, but like I feel like I'm like terrified for the shock to like wear off and like get to the other side, and I just like I don't know what that looks like, and it's like scary, and I don't know if you have any like comments about that, like I'm just.
Well, I think you've hit the nail on the head. Thank you for being here, first of all. Thank you for being brave enough to come here. Grief is a place that none of us really know until we get there. It really is. We have no idea. But if you can take a few things away from tonight, and that is, it's going to unfold the way it's going to unfold. And you can do certain things. I would suggest right now is that you kind of get things in place, maybe like your support team. You know, have resources ready to go.
Yeah.
And also trust, going back to our instinct and not listening to the static in the background. We are capable of dealing with pain. We just don't like it. Now, you've also had a traumatic event by finding your mother. So that has to be dealt with as well. It's not just about missing her. You have to deal with the trauma of having found her as well.
I can't stop seeing that image.
That's normal right now. That's very normal. Because in your brain, that's got to be integrated into your reality. That's not something that we're accustomed to. That's not built into a human being. So it's trying to become part of your reality, a very painful part. So you've got two pieces there. You've got the trauma of finding her, and then the bereavement part of missing her after. Just trust yourself, okay? And just get some good people to surround you. Thank you. Yes?
I just wanted to speak on when I first, sorry I walked in a little late, but I came in when you were talking about the connections, that the loss of that person, you know, what it means, your connection that you lost with them. And I just wanted to highlight, me, it was like, not only the death of my mom at a young age, and she was the glue of the family, and like once she died, I was like estranged from like my one sibling and my father, right? So it's like grieving like just everything at once, and then, you know, I have the jealousy of my husband because his parents are they're older and they're alive, and I struggled, like I was in bed for months, and I really appreciate you going over you have to find your own connections, and I had to get out and get the help professionally, and then, you know, I actually saw the coordinator in here.
Yeah,
coordinator's here.
Yeah. Are you going to Julian's house?
That has been like the best thing, and I just wanted to make sure that there's some newer losses in here, and even older ones, like otherwise I wouldn't have been able to push myself to get out of the bed, to take a shower, to, you know, because I felt so isolated in this process that people didn't understand it, or I wondered if they even cared, you know, and I wasn't encouraged to show, to mourn in front of these people. And then trying to be strong for my own children and stuff. I didn't want to put my grief on them, right? So yeah, I tried to make myself strong. But anyways, just because everything is physical in the body, all this grief, just getting out and walking and just being in touch with nature.
Movement, yeah.
That has been like probably my saving grace to push through this. And yeah, I just want to say that.
Thank you. Thank you for coming out here. You hit on a lot of really good points. Dynamics do change in the family, and I think I might have had 1 or 2 points on that. And one of the other losses also is people are surprised after a death that very close relationships fade, like either you're related or just close friends. You have to really look at what was the reality of the relationship before the death, because it didn't just happen because of that. It was probably on shaky ground before that, and mom held it together. Everybody was there for mom. So yes, you're experiencing secondary losses as well. It sounds like you mentioned about this uncomfortable feelings of feeling jealous over your husband, the fact that he still got his parents. And that you can't share that with everybody when you feel those things. But you need to be able to share it with at least one other person that you trust, because it's got to come out. It has to come out. You can't keep it in here. And all I would suggest about your kids, because we don't want to raise another generation of mourning, avoiding people, little humans. Be honest with them. That sad is not bad. Sad is not bad. We can't be happy all the time. I'm hoping some people will be sad when I die. Like, I want them to be sad. But you don't have to be sad the rest of your life. So be honest with your kids. Tell them age-appropriate information about how mom's feeling. And then balance that with a happy memory. So you're not minimizing or ignoring your sad. You're saying we can still get through it. And yes, I'm very proud of Julian's house. I was one of the founding members. And that's my continuing bond with this work that I'm doing, is my continuing bond with my daughter that I lost. To continue doing this work in memory of. So I'm very proud of Courtney and what they're doing at Julian's house. Any other questions? Thank you for sharing. Thank you for opening up your hearts and sharing. And I wish you all one more.
It's something very easy, just the last slide.
Oh, you want to sing it?
I just want to wrote it down by quick to the end.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're most welcome. And next month will be